Good morning, friends. It's Pastor Cathy, and we have some exciting news about this fall. Our church is co-hosting and co-sponsoring a faith and grief session, and we thought it might be a good idea to talk with Mary Jane Smith, who has had some experience with that organization, and to give you an understanding of what might be, what you could expect from that, and how that group has helped her in dealing with her grief. So Mary Jane is a long-term member of Arapaho and is very involved. Some of you may have seen her in her lawn visits in the morning. And she's very involved in many things, the Enneagram and faith and grief, and you see her around a lot. So Mary Jane, why don't you share a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in faith and grief?
Okay, thank you, Cathy. Thank you first for asking me to talk about something that's very important to my heart, and that's faith and grief. We were fortunate enough that my husband, Frank, retired early, so we spent several years on a farm playing like farmers and enjoying that time, and then we decided to travel, so we did that for a while. And then 12 years ago, we decided it was time to come back closer to family and to create community. And so several months after we moved to Richardson, we looked for a church, trying to find a church that was a good fit for us. And we found Arapaho. It was a church that we had looked for that was inclusive for all of our lives. And so it was a very good fit. And life was good. And then 5 years later, Frank died of pancreatic cancer. And that started my journey, my grief journey. And my grief journey, though, also strengthened my faith because of my grief.
Yeah, and that does happen a lot. So linking the two of them, faith and grief, so that's how you became involved, was that Frank passed away.
Right.
And you knew you needed some help. So some people, Scott had such a wonderful sermon on Sunday when we talked about grief, and some might be reluctant to become involved in faith and grief just from I don't know what to expect. So what might they expect in this process? It's like 8 weeks, right?
Well, for me, it was, that is something that's coming up in October that we'll talk about. Okay. But for me, it was about 6 months after Frank died that Patrick Hoffman was our associate pastor at that time.
Right.
And he was involved with faith and grief. He had a friend that was involved. And so he invited me to come along when he was a liturgist one time. And I was very reluctant to go because I thought that I was doing fine on my own. But I did go. And what I found with faith and grief, this is the faith and grief part of it that I'm involved in, is monthly meetings, an hour. We are involved with First Presbyterian Church and Canyon Creek Presbyterian Church. We're partners with them. Mm-hmm. And so I went to, this was when St. Barnabas was a partner before we became a partner. And I found there that the group was a safe place for me to grieve because I could be honest about my grief in a way that I was not honest with family and friends because I didn't want them to worry about me. Yeah. And I didn't want to appear weak. Yeah. So this was a very safe place. And so I started there and went monthly for years, 2 or 3 years. And then just kind of a progression, I have become a facilitator now. But faith and grief is very, I think it's a very important part of my growth.
So how many people are involved in like a group?
Well, at a table, there are 6 of us usually. Mm-hmm. And but it just depends. There are probably maybe 4 or 5 tables. And our church now is involved as a member of the 3 churches. And faith and grief was started by local ministers, Presbyterian ministers who were working with hospice patients and their families. and they discovered that the families needed something after the patient died, that they needed support. And so they started this monthly meeting, and it's just for an hour, but it's something that it's like a booster shot. And it's a place to go and to realize that other people are doing the same that you're doing. And now it's nationwide, so it certainly took hold.
Yeah.
And,
well, so I know just based on my training that there are different stages of grief, and they don't necessarily, we don't necessarily involve ourselves in each one of them for the same amount of time. It's sometimes not linear, but all these stages pop up. Can you talk to that a little bit, and to how you can identify those in this faith and grief group?
I think I can identify more myself personally. I think the faith and grief group, really what we do there is just, there's a little theme, and then there's a question and you talk, but it's more just kind of talking about your loved ones, and that's how you start out. And for me personally, the first thing I did was start reading every book I could. And I realized very quickly that some of the books spoke to me and some of them didn't. And I couldn't get into the stages. I felt like that was too constrictive for me. I needed, I needed, I didn't go through the anger stage. I didn't go through some of the other stages, and I felt like that was not for me. But I found a book that I felt what helped me most was to be able to talk about Frank and to remember him, and I needed time to process. I think some people need to go right away and be involved, and some people need to wait. And for me, I needed time to process, because Frank and I had been married for 56 years. We were a team. I depended on him and he depended on me. So it was, I didn't know who I was. I had no identity without him. And so I prayed about it, and I just felt like I just told God, I can't do this, And so God helped me, and God put me on the journey that I'm now on, which is faith in grief and helping others with faith in grief.
So have you noticed that, so when, just drawing on Pastor Scott's sermon he didn't just talk about grief as death of a person. He talked about, we are grieving what was, we are grieving a lifestyle, we're grieving not being with our friends and things like that. Are you able to, having been through this, are you able to see different kinds of grief, not just...
Absolutely.
Would you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think I've always felt, as I've gone through this, that it's not just about your loved one. That's very important, but there are other things like losing a pet is very important, or things like a divorce, that's grief, and loss of a friend or a job. Those things are, there's grief there. And I think that's just as important for people to deal with that and to talk about it. And I thought that Pastor Scott's sermon was absolutely brilliant. I was nodding all the time, yes. And one of the things that he touched on, I think we are grieving now. I think we're all grieving. I think we need to talk about our grief. But the one thing that he talked about a little bit that I thought was anticipating grief, that kind of grief that you're, especially if you have a loved one who is like Frank was, several months that you're on hospice and the time is coming. We grieved together, which was very important in my whole journey. It was because Frank and I, we held each other, we cried, we talked about it, that, this was the end. And I think that without that time with him, I wouldn't maybe have been able to grow as much as I have.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to be able to identify what we're going through right now as a bit of grieving and mourning and even lamenting. That,
yes, lamenting.
We don't use that word very often.
Right.
We don't read Lamentations and something from that.
Because it's really hard.
I know, right? So So you've got some benefit out of this, and even later as a facilitator, you're still able to apply some of
And
the things.
yes,
Are individuals, so is it any kind of grief? So if you've lost a pet or,
it is any kind, any grief is welcomed.
yeah,
Um, but it usually is someone who's lost, a loved one.
right, right. So a couple of things here. We've got something coming up starting in October,
Yes.
where normally, there's, I'm gonna give a summary here, but Mary Jane mentioned three different churches: Arapaho, Canyon Creek Presbyterian, and First Presbyterian. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. The three of us are partners in hosting, and our pod hosts periodically, and it's Arapaho's time to host. But of course, we're going to be online. So at least to start with, because we
Right.
don't want to expect and then have to drop out. So why don't you, can you share a little bit about what that time would be like? Because it's not a once a month thing.
No, I can't. I can share. I have not been through that. In fact, I think that I would like to say that I think it would have been very helpful for me, especially in the beginning, if I had gone through that 8 periods. So since I haven't been a part of it, I'm not really sure exactly how it's laid out, but I know that they've extended it from 6 to 8 weeks because they feel like there are a couple of things in there that they need to do. One is they need to have a time where people can talk about their loved ones and can share memories, which to me is just really a big part of the healing process.
Right.
And then at the end, which is another part of the healing process, is at the end, they will do a celebration of the lives of those lost. But in between, there will be several things that there will be workbooks and there will be tools that you're given, meditations and things to help when you're stuck in a certain spot in your grief.
Right. So it's helping to process.
Yes, yes.
In a weekly, and it's weekly, right?
Right, it's weekly. Yes,
yeah.
It's
yeah.
8 weeks, and so each week they learn something else.
For lack of a better term, there's a curriculum that they follow.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So, so this has been great, helpful. It starts on, is it October 8th? Is that what we decided?
Oh,
I'm gonna look it up. I've got it right.
I think it's a week earlier than that.
It's early October. Let's go with that, and we'll have the announcement coming out. I know we have a meeting with them this Thursday, so we'll have the announcement coming out about that. You mentioned some books that you had read.
Yes.
Are those some that you can share with me that we can keep on file, that if someone wants to do some?
Yes, and I don't know that I don't have them right with me, but one that helped me a lot was Getting Grief Right.
Getting Grief Right.
Yes, and this I've loaned it to someone, so I don't have it right with me, but that is the one that about talking about your loved one and about sharing the memories and making sure. One of the hardest things is when I began to feel like that I was growing and that I was moving ahead and could almost say life is good again. I had the feeling that I was leaving Frank behind, and that was a real, I had guilt.
Yeah.
And then finally, I guess it happened that I began to realize that I had all the memories, the good, bad, and the ugly memories, but they were there and they'd always be with me. And so I couldn't leave him behind even if I wanted to.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. So I think one thing that's come across that you've said, and I don't know if you realize that you said this, but I'm going to summarize it. When we talk about faith, there's many components to it, but there's an individual faith and there's a community faith.
Right.
And we practice our faith individually and community. And it sounds like that's also happening here, that there's a lot that one-on-one you can get by reading and listening and participating in the 8-week curriculum and learning how to process it. But then overall, as you grow and learn to deal with your grief, there's a whole community that you can participate with who have been through the same thing, that helps us to talk out our grief and talk about the memories and keep those memories alive. Is that fair?
That is, yes, that is exactly right. And
so what a great way to continue your faith.
yes, yes. And I think people will, it always happens that someone that is really kind of stuck someplace, the people around the table they'll just take over and they will help and they will share. And, you know, the
Right.
facilitator just sits back and waits. And it's a beautiful thing to watch.